Hello and welcome to The Green Stream, a podcast brought to you by Sustainable Business Network Detroit, a network of partnerships between Southeast Michigan stakeholders, innovators, and changemakers. Each partner is on a mission to advance and amplify sustainable business practices, and we're here to learn from, share, and help activate a sustainable way forward for Greater Detroit. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review and join the conversation on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And head over to our website, sbn-detroit.org. Now, let's listen in to our conversation with today's sustainability leaders.
Hi, I'm Nancy Kaffer. I'm a columnist and editorial board member at the Detroit Free Press. I have written about sustainability land use issues for a couple of years now, and I am really excited to be here to talk about these things with Anika Goss, Executive CEO of Detroit Future City. Anika, welcome.
Hi, Nancy. I'm really excited to be here on behalf of Detroit Future City as well, and to talk about sustainability in Detroit.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about your background, because you've been at Detroit Future City for how long now?
5 years. It'll be 6 years. 6 years. It's 6 years, actually.
Wow, 6 years. Time flies.
I know.
But you have worked in this space and around these issues for pretty much your whole career, right?
Yeah, well, I have a career in community and economic development, and I worked for a local initiative support corporation, both in the local office and the national office, for the majority of my career, and did a little time at the city of Detroit as well. Environmental sustainability was actually pretty new to me when I came to Detroit Future City. I had been working on land use issues previously and worked on really significant issues on obsolete and vacant property in Detroit and reducing the number. I worked on a team that actually helped design what we know now as the Detroit Land Bank Authority. So I've been in this space for a long time. I think what was new for me, at least at Detroit Future City, was this idea of connecting obsolete and vacant property to open space and environmental sustainability. But that was a critical part of the Detroit Strategic Framework, which some of you may be familiar. It's the 50-year strategic economic and land use vision, 50-year vision for Detroit. And there's a significant environmental sustainability component to that framework. And the principles of the framework is what really guides Detroit and Detroit Future City.
I think that's an interesting point you just made is, for a long time it was here's environmental issues on this bucket. And then there's, economic development, urban land use, that kind of stuff in this other bucket. And I think what's changed in the last, 5 to 10 years, maybe even really just 5 years, is understanding that, especially in a city like Detroit, where land use and poverty and the environmental health of residents are so linked, that these are the same things, and that environmental isn't like this one issue that it.
Right.
Yeah.
I completely agree. And I think, there have been grassroots organizations that have led the environmental sustainability work. Detroiters working for environmental justice, Southwest Detroit Environmental Vision. I could list several more that have at the neighborhood level, at the community level, we the people has a whole environmental component to it. However, I do think, to your point, and this was something that I noticed when I came in brand new, like so brand new, Nancy, I had to start going to all of the green conferences to even understand the language and know what people were talking about. But one thing I had noticed was that all of the environmental sustainability meetings were people who were highly technical, highly experienced in that issue, highly educated in the issue, and mostly white. Like you could literally count the number of Black and brown people in the room if it was an environmental sustainability conversation. And environmental justice, it was, and I should also say, it was also highly funded. This was the area, everyone was giving money to the environmental sustainability folks. On the justice side, it was mostly people of color, really, bootstrapping it, raising money as they could for this environmental effort, trying to get information as they could. And I would agree with you that gap is closing. And some of it's closing. I mean, everyone complained about the drainage fee at the city of Detroit, but it really ended up becoming the great equalizer, right? Like,
wow, yeah.
If corporations were getting charged and for drainage fees, as well as mom and pop small businesses in the neighborhood, and helping people to understand what it meant to reduce stormwater overflows and what green stormwater infrastructure meant, that actually created one table.
I want to talk about, so the sustainability piece and the environmental piece that's starting to, marry to the environmental justice movement, which is also so fascinating to think about. I live in Southwest, and this is obviously, even before I moved here, I was aware of this strong history of activism around all of the plants here and asthma rates and just this, and the so many amazing activists who have been working diligently at this for a long, long time. But when we're talking about Detroit Future City, okay, so when this started as an organization to provide, at a time when Detroit was shrinking in terms of population and had unsustainable expenses to maintain a city built for, at that time, 1 million more people than it currently held, and now it's fewer than that. They were now around 650,000, and from 2 million at our peak. So a big driver behind that was to figure out a long-term strategy for how the city works when it has much fewer people, and not just from a revenue perspective, but from a space perspective. So talk from Detroit Future City's inception to kind of how sustainability has looked in that Detroit Future City work to develop this long-term plan for Detroit.
Oh, that's a great lead in. Thank you for that, Nancy.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. So when, I think during the planning process of the framework, land itself was the problem, right? And from a community perspective, how much vacant land there was and how that land was not being used was the problem. And the framework, the beauty of the framework was that you had experts and residents working together to build the framework. And so what went into the framework as a principle was that neighborhoods, in order for them to be sustainable, have to be productive. And in order for them to be productive, they have to be environmentally safe, useful, and healthy for families. And so we have to consider all of those things. And so that went into the framework as a core principle: greening of Detroit's neighborhoods, sustainability of Detroit's neighborhoods. And so what that evolved into, there were a number of projects that I could list that were sustainably related. Like we designed a checklist and benchmark for the demolition for BSEED at the time to actually measure lead when they were demolishing homes and structures in a neighborhood within a certain circumference of schools. That is still a policy that exists today that BSEED uses. There was a really interesting partnership that partnered neighborhoods with barbers and mowers that everyone laughed about, and including me, and thought it was a ridiculous project called the Buzz, but it turned out to be one of the coolest things that we've ever done, and we get asked on a regular basis to do that again.
Okay, say a little bit more about what that is, because I don't know that one.
It was, oh my goodness, you're gonna love this. So it was a project where barbers, neighborhood barbers, and neighborhood barbers in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods are artists, right? They're not just trimming up buzz cuts. They're also drawing lines and being really creative with those cuts for boys' hair. And so those same barbers partnered with lawn mowing services, with mowers. And these are the guys you see riding around with mowers in the backs of their trucks. And they worked with communities to identify lots where they actually mowed in the designs that the barbers would design.
I love every single thing about this. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it was a lot of fun, and then we had a whole community day for it. We had block parties all over the city where we did these with food, and you could walk around the neighborhood and see the lot designs. So
when are we doing this again? Let's do this again. So no, so so this is interesting though, because we're talking about back when Detroit Future City started up, like you said, land was seen as the problem. There was too much of it. We couldn't maintain it. We talked about right sizing the city or shrinking the city. There were plans picking up on Marie Farrell Donaldson's or discussion around that early 90s suggestion that we close down parts of the city because they couldn't afford to be maintained. And it's interesting. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's been that long, but it has been a long time. And we're in such a completely different situation with land and the value of it, that it's hard to remember that back then it was seen as a real albatross. But what you said there about Detroit Future City, and this is what I think was so brilliant about that early work, is that it didn't say that this land. Oh, also, I'm sorry to interrupt myself here. At that time, I mean, Detroit went without a master plan for a long time. And when Detroit Future City started up, we were still looking at that. I mean, the master plan had still been made by the Archer administration in the 90s with the clusters and everything, right? Which still had really unrealistic sort of projections for what neighborhoods were going to become. There was more investment and there was so what I thought was so brilliant about that early work of Detroit Future City is it redefined what, like you said, a neighborhood needed to be productive, or a lot or a space needed to be productive. And it didn't necessarily say this has to have 7 new businesses or a new condo development or some sort of traditional economic development activity. It really changed it to changing that question of what is the highest, best use of this piece of land.
Exactly.
Really, that was a huge shift.
It was a huge shift.
Yeah.
And it lifted up, I think, and I wasn't there at the time. I wasn't here in those early strategic framework days, but I do think that what it then helped to do was lift up those neighborhoods that were leading with green, right? So the Lower East Side Action Plan, LEAP, which came out of, at the time it was Warren Connor Development Coalition, and now it's East Side Community Network. That was all for years. Their work in Chandler Park was all about sustainability, and their work on how do you actually use green as the lead development engine for a low density neighborhood. That it really sort of pushed that concept, I think, forward.
Yeah, and LEAP and first LEAP and now the East Side Community Network, they've been a visionary organization, whatever their name was called, under a series of great leaders or
Yeah.
Two great leaders, I guess. It's a short series.
I think it is just two.
Wonderful people, though. Yeah, and that was what's so interesting about the Detroit Future City initial framework, is that what could be productive could be a green space. It could be green or blue infrastructure. It could be one of those things that is of value, but not a traditional bottom line value. Do you want to talk a little bit about green stormwater infrastructure and the Land and Waterworks Coalition, and kind of how that evolved and what the real impact of that is looking like?
Yeah, and so you should know this is not a program that we're currently operating.
Okay.
But I think
Sorry.
it's okay. It's it's okay. Because I think that the purpose of the Land and Waterworks was really to provide during the time when people were really anxious and unsure of what the drainage charge could mean for them personally. Whether it was a residential charge but certainly small businesses and churches were receiving extraordinarily large water bills, and that needed to be addressed. And so one of the things that we were able to do in partnership with the Herb Foundation and 8 amazing environmental organizations, including including the Sierra Club and Eastside Community Network and Greening of Detroit and Friends of the Rouge. And I'm not going to be able to list all of the organizations because I don't remember them all. But they're all so important, and they're all still doing all of this amazing work. Came together to create a curriculum that would allow for residents and community leaders to train other residents and community leaders in green stormwater infrastructure. And then we also raised additional resources to help small businesses and churches actually implement some of that green stormwater infrastructure, which could be expensive, and it's an expensive investment, but you could get if you went through the process at the time, you could get a credit. The bigger point of it, why I still think it's still super relevant, we were able to reach, and when I say reach, they either came to a session or received a flyer or a booklet or some sort of training, 40,000 Detroiters.
Wow.
40,000. People understood, if you get to that level, that means you know what the term green stormwater infrastructure means and what it means to you, and that, what you can do personally, whether it's planting a rain garden. Now, I think the question we had, which I was really glad to have, is that when we began to get those 1,000-year rainstorms every summer, or twice in the summer. It was supposed to happen every 1,000 years or every 100 years, and we were getting twice in the summer. Green stormwater infrastructure isn't going to help that. Your rain garden is not going to help that. That was really the combined sewer overflows. How are we actually managing the infrastructure in Detroit? And the bigger picture between the relationship between the Great Lakes Water Authority, GLEWA, and the city of Detroit's water department, and what was broken in those systems, and how those systems were not meeting the needs of Detroiters. And I think that is the lesson learned. And I think because of Land and Waterworks, and we were talking about it so much, it made it very easy to be able to say, here's what's actually happening here.
You mentioned talking with 40,000 Detroiters through this process. That has always been a big focus of Detroit Future City. I remember all the engagements with the table when that started
Yeah,
off.
yeah.
But it's always been a big focus is to really make plans that actually engaged people and really spoke to people where they were and tried to work with them in their where they're at.
Yeah.
How does that work? I mean, we have a lot of organizations that try to do community engagement at varying degrees of success. Can you just talk a little bit about maybe the things you've learned? I don't want to say best practices because that's such a jargony term, but what are some of the things that through this work of reaching people that you feel like has made it possible to be effective at that?
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, I think the number one thing that we are very clear about at DFC, and when we're not, someone is always there to remind us, is that we are not of the people, right? Like DFC, Detroit Future City, is a think tank. We're an innovation engine. The person who answers the phone at Detroit Future City has a master's degree. Okay, so like that's who we are. However, who we want to support with all of the data and information and resources and technical stuff we have, we want them to have all of the information and lead. We want them to be as informed as possible. We want them to have the right answers, right? We don't want them to ever be misinformed or not understand anything that's happening anywhere in Detroit. And so whether it's environmental sustainability or economic development or tax reform or the budget process, whatever it is, that we see that as our role. So in order to really play that role in a way that's effective, you have to have partners that are on the ground that have those relationships, so that we can actually be genuine and honest and open with our information and what we have, and then how people receive it. So our reports are in plain English, and we try really, really hard to do that, right? To make sure when we will go back and forth explaining a definition until we all get it. We include a lot of kids in our engagement process, asking kids what they think and what their opinions are. I am strongly resistant to becoming a youth serving organization. We are not, but then we are, because we're actually engaging kids in all of these things that we're doing on a regular basis. And so that's a priority to us. Anytime we're doing a program, anytime we have a report, there is always an engagement component to it. And so then what ends up happening, Nancy, and you know this as a communicator of information to the public, people then rely on you as an accurate source of and a trusted ally for information. If you call us, we answer the phone, we spend time with you, and then they go back and tell others. And so I think that helps.
Yeah, sure. Once you establish some credibility, it definitely helps feed further credibility. So, but you mentioned also working with community partners, and I know you work with individuals and groups. So when you're working on some kind of community initiative, do you do training and technical assistance for partner organizations? Is that something you guys do?
Sometimes. I mean, I think that, one of my favorite projects that we're working on right now is the East Ferry Warren project. I feel like it is the coolest community in Detroit, right? It's my favorite. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a neighborhood that has intentionally chosen to lead their revitalization process with green. So there are tree farms, there's a meadow, there are hundreds of gardens in this one neighborhood. And so we're contributing. Not only did we give them initial resources for to support them in their gardens, their vacant lot, to convert vacant lots into community gardens. But we're partnering with Arboretum Detroit and the neighborhood association over there to actually build a forest. So we took 6 lots and are turning that into a forest. General Motors has funded some other placements like benches and accessibility. So if you are in a wheelchair, you can ride up into the forest safely. That is probably, yeah. And so those are all residents. We have to be super careful in there, you know, like we don't go running in there trying to have events without permission. This is their neighborhood. So when they ask us to come, because we have landscape architects and master gardeners that work for us at DFC and that work in there, they ask us and we provide.
So then you're saying you sort of see your role there as not to come in and tell them what to do, but when they tell you what they want to do, you help them figure out how to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
yes.
That's awesome. Also very into urban forests. Let's have more of those. I would like a magical forest right around the corner. That would be great.
You know, Nancy, I feel like the idea of these resilient neighborhoods that have all of these assets like forests and meadows and gardens in the middle of your neighborhood is really the neighborhood we all deserve to live in, right?
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to the idea that every lot or every space, you know, can be productive. Even, you know, a forest is productive. It has a tangible benefit in terms of air quality and you know, drainage and environmental aspects. It also has an intangible quality of life piece to it. But it's definitely not a traditional understanding of productivity in the way that it was used 20 years ago, or commonly used 20 years ago. But that's really very great. We should not all leap into our cars and go drive through this neighborhood. Like we should at least coordinate times so that we're not all like showing up there, right? So and that's part of and that's related kind of to your, I don't know if it's related to, but it's reminding me of your Working with Lots program. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. This program started, it was like one of the first official programs of Detroit Future City. And the staff when I first started and they issued the RFP, and you know, my background, LISC is a multi-million-dollar organization, right? With all kinds of resources, and if you're writing a grant to LISC, it's typed up and has all of these certifications attached to it. We're receiving grants for $5,000. We had this little budget that we were carved out of our operating budget to make these grants. And they were literally presidents of block clubs handwriting in cursive their need for $5,000 to turn a vacant lot in their neighborhood into a community garden. I was the worst grant reviewer ever. Yes, everybody gets one.
Yeah, I'd be a sucker for that too. Like, yeah, like so heartfelt, so like real. Yeah, somebody's needs aren't less valid because they don't have a, you know, Microsoft Office template of some kind. In fact, their needs may be more valid.
They were, and or there was just like one guy who lived in a neighborhood who was trying to turn the whole block into a series of gardens. You know, and we learned so much from that. And it turned, I mean, we have now transformed 24 miles in Detroit.
Wow.
In vacant lots. I know. It's like
that's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Tell me about, like, I don't know, we already talked about the forests of East Ford and East Ferry. Tell me about another favorite project.
Yeah.
I mean, I know they're all your favorites, but just like
They're
pick them among
all
your
my
favorites.
favorites.
Then we can talk about which of your children you love the most. No.
Right. It depends. You know, one of the things that I think that we're doing that's really, really interesting, we're spending a lot of time in that urban forest, East Ferry Warren work. But we are also spending a lot of time, we're a part of a project with the University of Michigan, and we have a limited project with this, a limited role in this. But this particular project will measure the amount of gun violence based on whether there are community gardens in that neighborhood.
Oh, wow.
And so
That's really interesting.
isn't that interesting? They believe that if there are more, and it doesn't have to be a garden, it just has to be some sort of productive use where there isn't blight and vacancy in that neighborhood, that crime reduction, violent crime reduction is decreased. So it's a longish term initiative, but it's really, really exciting.
Okay, so I know this is not exactly falling into the category of broken windows policing, but it seems like it borrows a little bit from the same idea that when spaces are productive and maintained and purposeful and occupied, they're a crime deterrent. And I know that that idea has gone through various waves of popularity. So this is an effort to, and I know this is not policing. We're not remotely talking about policing. It just reminded me of this. If listeners aren't familiar with that, that was a theory that when blight and other minor violations of codes and things were handled, then the neighborhood or the area, commercial district, whatever it was going to be less prone to crime, because it would be like the more inhabited, more taken care of, more purposeful, and that there would maybe be even more hope and pride, maybe. I don't know. So yeah, I want to be clear that I'm not at all suggesting you're connected to a policing operation here.
No.
It's been
I think the correlation is more that those neighborhoods look like places where you could get caught.
Right. Well, that's
just kind of the same thing.
It's just someone's paying attention to a broken window, then they're going to wonder why these dudes are standing around on the corner.
Exactly.
At 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever. Yeah.
Or that the dudes don't even go into that. They're
right,
not
exactly,
major
because
crimes.
They know that someone's going to be like,
right, exactly. And it's sort of the anti-dumping policy is the same way. And there were a number of initiatives 10 years ago where we would just put up fences. And if you put up fences around vacant lots, they would look like productive lots and people wouldn't dump in them.
Okay, well, it's really interesting to see the results of the study. You said it's a longer term study.
It's a longer term, like 5 years. So I think they have a few more years. And I think they just want to test it over time to see what.
Right, sure. Well, and I'm sure that's very complicated statistically to tease out the various factors.
Yes, exactly. You know, one of the things I do want to talk about, though, if it's okay, Nancy, in terms of the sustainable business, the Sustainable Development Business Network of Detroit combines economic development with sustainability. And so we at Detroit Future City really are trying, what you're going to see from our strategic plan that's going to be released in the fall is that we are going to really lean into that. Mostly because we believe that Detroit itself has to become more resilient in order to offer amenities to Detroiters so that they don't have to move once they achieve a certain income level. And you've heard me talk about that a lot, different kinds of, talking about the middle class and the Black middle class. At the end of the day, we can focus on improving workforce opportunities, improving entrepreneurship opportunities, all we want. But if there's no place for Detroiters to live, or if there's so few places that have all of the amenities, including environmentally sustainable forests, gardens, solar, green stormwater practices, healthy water, clean air, then why would you stay here? Right? If you're making a little more money, you're still going to move to the suburbs. And this is all very interdependent. And I feel like this is really worth noting, and why this issue has to be so critically important right now.
Well, and that's like, that's not environmental sustainability, but that's sustainability of the city over the long term. Is, can the city retain people? Can the city continue to provide services? Is the city flexible enough to figure out how to do those things and how to offer people the equivalent quality of life that they could have somewhere else, or superior quality of life? Yeah. That's yes, it's totally, yeah, it's so connected, and all of that goes together, because we have to find every creative way to be an amazing place to live. And that's forests, that's the buzz, that's all these things that you can't really get somewhere else.
Yeah.
So,
Safe Space, one of the many grants that we did wanted a safe place in the middle of their neighborhood for kids to do their homework and hang out, that lived on that block when it was warm, and for them to play and make snowmen and other kinds of stuff when it was cold.
So simple, but so important.
So simple. And what a difference it made.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. Yeah. It's so many different aspects of this, that there's some land use that can be productive in every community and speak to that community's particular needs, if someone asks the questions and gives the resources to help. And of course, there's certainly neighborhoods that have done it on their own without any help or resources. I'm not trying to say that you have to have an organization to help you, but it's a lot easier if you have someone who can give you some funding and some suggestions and help you figure out how to get your plans advanced through the various bureaucratic things that may have to be dealt with. So you guys have bi-monthly working group meetings?
Our open space working group, which is very cool. And that we actually bring together just about everyone who works in land use and environmental sustainability. And we've continued to do that even in the very early green and blue infrastructure days of pre-DFC. The open space working group has city officials. This is where city officials can come and test their new land use ideas, the planning department. And cool. And Arboretum Detroit or some other community organization can say, hey, I have this really good idea about, we need to actually do a controlled burn but it has to be, for an area so that this part of the city will regrow. Well, what does that look like? The term burn, it triggers everybody.
Right.
Going to set something on fire? Right. No.
On purpose? Yeah. No.
But that's something that happens. That is a part of sustainability, and it's necessary.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Right. And so these groups have this working group has been pretty informative and fantastic. It's a very loose group, and we encourage everyone to attend. And it's become a resource, I think, for the public sector, but it's also for the private sector as a way to not only network, but also to, vet your big idea.
So you may have at a typical meeting folks from Detroit Future City, of course, from the nonprofit or community development sector, from the city, and from private business.
That's right.
So really the whole shebang.
The whole shebang. Environmentalists.
Residents.
Residents, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We don't get
So
as
how do
many residents, but we don't get as many periodically, like ECN or another community partner might come. Like there's a representative from LEAP, and that's a resident-based organization.
Okay. So how do you facilitate a meeting like that?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a sort of a standing agenda, and the group itself determines the agenda every other month. So they'll say, this is really what we need to talk about. And so there's usually a speaker, and then they, have questions. A speaker will talk for maybe 30 or 45 minutes, and then they'll ask questions. And then they use some of the time to talk about like significant issues and announcements to make sure people are aware of those issues and announcements. And then they'll determine what it is they need to discuss at the next week.
Okay. So it's kind of set. I'm sorry, you said the agenda is set every other month. So that would cover like 4 meetings. That's good. You can be flexible, but you're not floundering every time.
Exactly.
There's like a good mix. So
Mm-hmm.
so and how do you get people to I mean, how do you ensure I mean, how do you get the word out to people about this?
Well, the initial group was about 80 people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of the list that we're working. I think they average around 30 or 40 that come to the meeting. And people still find it valuable. I honestly think, Nancy, that people need the space. We could probably use something similar to this in every sector, but people need the space. This is where people can be creative. University of Michigan was prototyping, what is it called? The when you put the glasses on and
virtual reality.
Yeah. Virtual reality green, a virtual reality green walk for your neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So you put the glasses on and then you look out at your neighborhood and you can see this is what it would look like if you planted 200 trees, or this, and they prototyped it and used the open space working group to really sort of demonstrate what that would look like. And so you would come to that meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I would totally come to that meeting. So what in the sustainability space, what are Detroit Future City's biggest challenges over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. Well, we really are wanting to move into this climate resilient neighborhood space. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, are challenges for many reasons. There are innately, as I said earlier, there are innate structural, racial, and economic challenges that exist within the environmental sustainability community, that environmentalists have all of the resources and the money, and environmental justice work are activists that have no money. Mm-hmm. And when you put that at play in a neighborhood, how does that actually work out? Because now you're going to add a community development component to it at the neighborhood level. And not all the best neighborhoods. This needs to happen in marginal neighborhoods or neighborhood, our near middle class neighborhoods or our near middle class neighborhoods. And so these are neighborhoods that have pretty low vacancy. They're not on some sort of cool plan from the mayor's office. These are neighborhoods that are just kind of hanging out there. And to make these neighborhoods important, but while still holding value for the residents that are living there, and that helping to understand and to work with them on how to create a space for environmental sustainability in a Black and brown neighborhood, or both, or an immigrant neighborhood. That's going to be a big challenge, right? That's going to be a challenge for us. I think if you go to a community meeting and you ask a bunch of Detroiters what they want their neighborhood to look like it did in 1972, right? Where every lot had a house on it and a driveway and a garage in the front. That's what they wanted. But that's not happening.
Yeah, and they were occupied by families with good paying middle class jobs.
That's
and
right.
Yeah, it was a very vision of this past. Yeah, you do hear that at every neighborhood meeting. It's like, what do we want? We want it to be like it was, and that's a challenge. Yeah,
that's a challenge. That's not going to happen, and it's not going to happen. The other challenge that we're going to have, Nancy, and I think this is probably for a different show, is that we have to start standing up for ourselves a little more in Detroit, right? Like we have to begin to really, we all want new companies to come in. We want these companies to come in and move to Detroit and offer jobs, but they also have to be sustainable partners, because the space that we're offering is often in neighborhoods. And so I think if DFC is going to be in this space of resilience and saying neighborhoods that are climate resilient neighborhoods and asset rich neighborhoods can't also be toxic because of the fumes from a factory that's living next to it, or can't have lead water being pumped into it, groundwater, because of whatever is near it. And those are hard conversations to ask in effort to bring in new economic development. We always choose the path to the business.
Right. And a lot of times, I mean, you're right, this is a different show, but a lot of times we give them really large tax breaks to do it, which, so when someone wants to schedule us to be on the business tax incentive show, we can get into that, because I know we both have a lot of thoughts.
Yes.
So but back to sustainability. How do you personally view sustainability in terms of its applicability in an organization?
That's a tough one. And I tell you that I'm cool with all of it. Bring all of it, right? But then you're going to ask me to compost. And I don't know if you've ever worked in an office with a compost. It's the scariest thing ever, Nancy. It may as well be a live raccoon in the company kitchen.
I am not, I hope they don't boot me out of the sustainability podcast here, but I am not a composting person. It's a lot. So, yeah.
So we do it. I do it.
Now see, you tricked me, because you made it sound like you were neg on it and you didn't do it.
I am. I hate it. Are you kidding me? It's gross. I won't touch it. I won't touch it. But there are people, so I will say this, there are people you can hire that will come and do it for you. And I had to be trained in this, Nancy, seriously, where they had to say, Anika, this is how, get a paper towel, open the lid, put your food in it, close it up. You don't even have to look at it. And then the man will come and get it and take it away and then bring you a clean one.
Well, you're a better person than I am. No,
I'm not. I promise you, I'm not.
It's a challenge. It's a challenge. So you're open to everything, including composting.
I'm dragged along with composting. I believe in it. I want to do all of it. It's so good for the environment. It really is. But that's a tough one. I mean, I think I fight it like most, Detroiters of color. I've had to fight we have a lot of issues, and this one isn't one of them. I think that the climate changing effects and linking that to something as simple as clean out your stormwater drain, recycle, use recyclable paper products. Don't buy water bottles. for your office events,
Mhm.
right? All of those little things could potentially slow down eventually the 100-year rainwater flooding effects that we have
Right.
in the summer, because it does kind of come back to that. All of those
Yeah.
people whose basements were flooded. Yeah, it's all
And
linked.
8 inches right down there, right below our feet. Yeah. Mhm.
I'm so sorry for that. It's
Mhm.
all linked,
Yeah.
and so we have to do it as well.
Well, and I also want to note on the water bottle front, my personal pet peeve there is WSD water is tested, monitored, and they have to publicly post the results of what's in the water. And you don't know what's in that bottle of water because they're very loosely
Right.
regulated. Side note. So in addition to the plastic thing, and a lot of times it's just the WSD water or whatever the municipal system is put into a bottle and sold to you for, this glass of water costs pennies to fill up. And that bottle of water costs what, $2? So yeah, nag on those plastic water bottles.
Yeah.
So I guess, and we're kind of coming to the end of our time here. So I have kind of two more questions.
Okay.
What I want to talk about the role of sustainability in the future of the city of Detroit, and what you feel like Detroit is going to look like in 30 years, or what you hope
Yeah.
Detroit will look like in 30 years.
So I'm hoping, I think I talked a little bit about it, about climate resilient neighborhoods and asset rich neighborhoods for every neighborhood. So by 2050, I think, right? Is that 30 years from now?
2050, right? 30 years, yeah, give or take.
Yeah. So in 30 years, I think Detroit will still be a mid-sized city. I think a lot of cities will be, I think there's going to be an evening out across the country, like people in New York are trying to figure out how to get out. And Californians, it's a pressure cooker there, right? Trying to figure this out. And so you'll begin to see movement of a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. For Detroit, what I hope is that a climate resilient Detroit, in my opinion, and I've said this a million times, because people are always talking about how Michigan is the #1 climate change state in the United States, the best for climate migrants. So people moving from either hot or flooding or some other negative climate effect. Everybody's going to want to come to Michigan because of the weather and the access to water. What that does not include when they talk about that is Detroit. And Nancy, Detroit is still 90% of African American, Latino, foreign-born immigrant. And we cannot be a part, it's still a part of Michigan, but it is not anywhere close to being a climate resilient city. And so for it to be Michigan's largest city, that requires for us to do the work here for what does actually come up with those climate indicators for Detroit: soil, water, land, air, all of it. It might take us until 2050 to really get this done, but that has to be the priority if we want to really lead in this kind of climate sustainability. If we want to even sustain, we are not sustainable in Detroit the way we are sustainable in Michigan.
Yeah. And are we going to make it by 2050, do you think?
Sure.
Yeah. So we started off talking about your background, which has been in this space of community service and land use and functional communities, and now more tied to land planning and environmental sustainability. So what brought you to wanting to do this role, and what has inspired you since you've been in it?
Um, honestly, it's so funny, Nancy. I took this job because my children were, when I was at LISC, I was a bigwig at LISC. I was a vice president. I had 7 cities that reported to me. I'm on a plane every single week, like the biggest climate contributor, right? But I was on a plane every single week, and my children were 13, 12, and 15. And basically raising, I mean, their father is a very good father and contributes. Maybe he watches this, or someone he knows watches this. He did a lot while I was on the road, but they needed their mom, right? They needed their mom. My son would not have graduated from high school if I did not get off of the plane and surprise him at school, or surprise him at home. You're supposed to be on your way home. Why are you at this girl's house? And so that was really why I took the job. And then it turned out to be one of the most important jobs I've ever had. And I won't be here till 2050. I can tell you that right now. But I do think that for the time I'm here, my contribution to Detroit's future and this organization, Detroit Future City, is that Detroit deserves to have a long-term think tank and innovation engine that will continue to move it forward. And if I can build it, everyone behind me can keep it going.
Amen.
You asked me what inspires me?
Yeah.
I think what really I tell you, there's 2 things that really inspire me. One, are really active neighborhood residents. I feel like I'm a terrible neighbor. I live in a condo now, but I used to live in a house. And when I lived in a house, people would be like, "Lady, will you mow your lawn? What is wrong with you?" I was a terrible resident. But so people who are really leading in this work, right, are leading to make their neighborhoods better. It really moves me, right? Like those mowers and barbers, they were so proud of what they were doing in their own neighborhoods. Really, their stories, I mean, just would bring tears when they talk about their neighborhood, this lot, and what it looked like. Somebody getting shot there, somebody getting beat up there, little girls having to walk to school by themselves. Taking control of that neighborhood and turning it into something else. It truly inspired. And then finally, the kids that participate in our focus groups and want to know more about economic development and climate change. These kids want to know, right?
Kids are very cool.
Oh my gosh. It was, I mean, they have so many opinions, and they see their own future so brightly, right?
Yeah.
Like they see themselves with a future. So we have to get it right. If they see themselves having a future, then we need to make sure we're doing our jobs so that they can have that future.
That what you said about Detroiters, I think that's one of the biggest things that people who watch the city from the outside get wrong, is that they can see these vacant lots or blight or whatever, and they believe that it's a city where people don't care. But I have never been in a place where people care as much as Detroit. People care so much, and it's continually an inspiration to me as well. It's the thing that outsiders get wrong more often than they get anything else wrong about Detroit. But all right, we are at the end of our time together here. I think we could probably talk for 4 more hours, but we're going to stick with our schedule and shut it down here. So thank you so much. This has really, truly been a pleasure. And always talking to you is always a treat, and learning what you're doing now, the past and the future of the work at Detroit Future City in terms of sustainability, the work you're doing for the city of Detroit. And thank you to the Sustainable Business Network of Detroit for hosting this conversation. And Yeah, we're available for all of your podcasts on land use, tax, climate, business incentives, development. Feel free, reach out, guys. But no, this has been
such a
great.
pleasure, Nancy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to the Sustainable Business Network Detroit, the Green Stream podcast. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure to follow us on sbn-detroit.org and stay tuned for more conversations on sustainability from inside and around the city.